We've all had incredible wildlife encounters, but as a photographer, there's a whole different story once you get home. The excitement in the field when you finally get that photo of the animal that you wanted, you take that card, you plug it into your computer, and finally you have those images in Lightroom. To me at least, it's about taking those images you capture in the field and transforming them into a piece of work that really exemplifies that experience that I had out there in nature. And from there, you get to share it with friends, families, and even our audiences. We not only owe it to ourselves to create the best work we possibly can, but we also want to take those beautiful animals and do justice by them in our work. And that is exactly why we're here today, to take images like this, to images like this, and images like this, into images like this. And you're going to be able to do the same with your wildlife images by the end of this video. Before we jump into Lightroom and I share my screen, I just wanted to say that all of the images that we're going to be using today, which is 2 of them, are going to be down in the description below. Just download the RAWs from Dropbox. You can also download the final edits that I finish here today so you can compare them back and forth. You can also work alongside with my process with one of your own images. Now let's jump over into Lightroom and I'm going to share a screen recording of my process. I'm going to have my head in the corner, so if I'm not looking at the camera, don't judge me. But I'm going to be using a keyboard as well as a mouse. So just for reference, I like to edit with a mouse. It makes things a lot easier. So first things first. Now that we're into Lightroom and I'm using Lightroom Classic, this is just my library here. We're going to start with our first photo. So now that you've uploaded your photo, that's the first step. Then hit the Develop tab here. So the first image that we're going to use today is a great gray owl. First thing I like to do when I get an image and I'm starting to edit is get into the Develop tab and then just have a look at the overall image. Obviously, we can see that it's not very bright here. I've got lots of room to crop in from the head here. And then we can see that there's not a lot of strong light or color going on. So step number 2 that I always do pretty much in my process is just do the crop that I'm looking for right away. Sometimes I'll go back and crop at the end and adjust my settings for that crop, but usually I've got a specific crop in mind, so I'm gonna hit that crop. And today I'm gonna edit specifically for Instagram usage. So I hit that 4:5 in our crop and straighten panel over here on the right. And then we can see that he's sitting on a post and that things aren't straight. There's nothing really here that's straight, but I still am gonna try to get it to feel a little bit more natural. Sometimes I use wildlife's eyes or something like that as a gauge, but honestly, I don't think we need to straighten this one too much. I'm gonna go a little bit to the right and then bring that in just to get a nice kind of crop. So again, keeping in mind our rule of thirds, which is these lines here. So if we're talking vertically, our bottom third is the post, the body, and then I often like to line up the eyes on the kind of the top third of that image. I'm gonna go a little bit off that and fill that frame up a little bit more and try to keep that face just about centered. Because it's going diagonally along here, I'm gonna go with that. It's not perfect, but just about centered. And I think once we click out of this, we're gonna have a nice frame there, and our face of our subject, which we're drawn to most, is kind of in the center of the frame. I'm actually just gonna bring that up a little bit more so his face is right in the middle of the image. All right, so now the next step is just gonna be our basic adjustments. I always start out by doing my kind of exposure and stuff before I do my temperature, kind of getting things to the place where I want it to be. Because this image is apparently too dark, I'm going to bring the overall exposure of the whole image up just enough that I'm not overblowing any highlights or blowing out any of the shadow places. There's still going to be detail in there, but I don't need to bring that completely out because it doesn't really add much to the image. What we're going to be looking at more is the face and the other kind of details of this animal. And the second thing is, now that we can see a bit more to the image, we want to see where we're going to be drawing our light in from, as well as the features of the animal. Specifically in this image, which is the eyeballs, which I really like the great grays for, as well as that yellow beak, and then keeping that brightness in the white plumage, kind of creating the contrast between the dark colors of the feathers here. So I'm not going to bring in too much contrast yet because we haven't done all of our adjustments quite yet, but I'm always kind of bringing that up because I am using the contrast slider as I work through. And that just kind of brings some of that more depth and the different contrast between the light and darks here. So generally what I do right away is bring my highlights pretty much to as far low as they can go. This image is going to be a little bit darker and flatter, so I'm going to go about 70 there, -70, 65. I'm going to bring my shadows up just a touch here to flatten this image out. Because kind of the way I work through is doing my basic adjustments and then bringing a lot of that depth and color and light back through masking. So as we work through these, we're going to be planning ahead for the masking. Next, I'm bringing my whites down, again, working towards that flat starting place for my image. You can see that we've got lots of nice depth and detail around the whole image. None of this snow is blown out. None of the whites on the animal are blown out yet, at this moment, I mean. And I've been toying around with different usage of the black. Sometimes I'll bring the blacks all the way up and then bring my shadows down, which this image creates pretty flat, but I'm just gonna hit undo twice. And when there's a lot of contrast, I find using the blacks instead of the shadow slider can really help. But because of this one, I'm just gonna bring the blacks up a little bit because I don't think there's very much contrast here and we don't need that smooth transition between the white and the blacks. Okay, next, here I don't mess around with too much. I'm gonna bring my contrast down, or my clarity down by 5, just to make it a little bit, not softer, but kind of makes it feel a little bit more smoother to me almost in general. We don't want to add clarity, to the whole image because we want that smooth background. So I feel like this is part of that stage, getting me to that nice starting point where we're gonna use the masking. Then I'm gonna bring up my dehaze by 5. And now this is up to discretion. I use the vibrance because it kind of gets me to a nice kind of starting place. I like to bring it up to around 20. I feel like that's more natural than pumping up that saturation. Obviously we can see some colors in here like that stand out right away, which is the greens, but I feel like that gives us a better kind of understanding of what colors are in the image, and it still feels nice and flat and neutral. So now that we've went through our basic panel, I'm gonna go and adjust my temperature because we have a good idea of what that image is looking like now. And there's a couple of things. So I feel like the image feels a little bit warm because these guys have more of a darker brown, not so warm tone in their feathers, as well as the image feels a little bit purple to me. So something that I also like to mention is that when you're working with animals and you're taking photos of different ones, knowing what that natural color of that species is really helps me kind of know which direction I want to go with an image, because I don't want to turn them into a different colored thing. So we don't want a purple owl here, for example. We want it to kind of be true to the real life image. And I like to bring that experience from the real world into my images and make it show how it feels. We can make a lot of difference by changing the tones in the background and around the animal, but I like to keep that natural tone and color to the actual species itself. So saying that, I'm gonna make this a little bit cooler, probably quite a bit cooler. And you can see right away that we're getting a different tone of the image. This is shot in the late spring or early spring, sorry, so it's definitely still winter. And then I am lately kind of always aiming for around that +8 point there. The greens here, we're not gonna have to worry about too much, but we're looking for our blues, our whites, sorry, and our shadows to see how those temperatures are affecting it. At least I am here, but I think that's a great starting place. So now that we have done our overview of the image, we've looked at it, see which direction we want to go. Next, we did our crop and now our basic adjustments. The next step is going to be going to the HSL slider, which is hue, saturation, and luminance. So there's a couple different ways you can do it with the point color, but today we're just going to be doing it with the mixer. I like to start with our hue. So we can see a few things here. I don't touch my reds too much unless there's a lot in the reds sector. The oranges, same sort of deal. There's not a lot of oranges here, but yellows is usually where I really like to start. I kind of start with that around the -10 place. I like to have a more orange hue to my yellows, and I feel like that helps me get that nice blue and orange split tone versus having kind of nasty yellows. And sometimes the yellows get affected by the greens and vice versa because it's so close oftentimes. So next is the greens. A lot of times, especially in this image, I'm going to be pretty much dragging that green all the way to the yellow side because this image doesn't have a lot of foliage in it, for example. I feel like the tone of that more yellowish color versus the real green here, especially on the post, is what I'm looking for in this instance. Next is our aquas. I'm really looking for less greens, so I'm gonna try to take these aquas to more of that blue side, maybe around 10, because I know the aquas sometimes are in that very close to kind of green hue. Next is our blues. every single image that I do is at -10 or 11. So that just takes it from the purple side of the blues over to our more aqua side of the blues. We're gonna leave it there at 10. And then onto our purples. Purples and blues are always bugging me, so I almost always drag my purples to pretty much the entire blue side. And you can see right there, that kind of fixes a lot of those color issues that I was seeing. And it's details, but purples just bother me, and I like the more cooler blue feel, so I'm gonna bring that to -80. And magentas I'm gonna leave alone for right now. So next, onto our saturation. This again is not as important in this image because it's a fairly flat image. We can see what those oranges do, but we don't really like how that's gonna affect it. The willows in the background in this image are kind of bright with those new kind of branches that are growing for that springtime. You can see there's lots of color there, and I actually might bring the color of the orange down quite a lot in this image, specifically because I'm taking a look at what I'm working with this shot and bringing that down probably about 25 to 30%. Yellows, we can just see how that affects it. Obviously, we see there's a lot of yellows in the eyes there. And when we affect the yellows, this is a global adjustment, so we're affecting everything. So for right now, I think I'm just gonna leave that as is. Greens, I'm gonna bring those down just a little bit, just because that's mostly in this post here. It's treated wood, so it's very green. And I think I'm gonna do the same with the aqua because it's also affecting that post kind of nastily. And I might do a specific adjustment on there to desaturate that even further. But through all of this, I'm keeping an eye on what this animal is looking like and making sure that it still looks true to life. So if we switch here back and forth, while this is warmer, they do take on more of a cooler gray color. And I feel like that's still a very good example of what that image or that animal looks like. This, we had some warm light coming in a little bit and it was kind of casting on there, and the white balance was a little bit off in my opinion in camera. So next we've got our purples, not such a big deal in this image, but we can probably bring those down a little bit, and same with our magnetas. Lastly is our luminance. So I do like the way that the yellow is gonna pop in this image. So because it's still affecting the background, I'm gonna bring that up a little bit. I'm also gonna bring up our blue luminance just a touch because that's gonna make our snow and our background pop and create a little bit more of color depth in this image. Greens, we can see what it just looks like bringing it down. I think bringing it down is a little bit better in this case because we took a lot of the saturation out of the green as well as the hue to the yellow side. And then let's just see here what we have with our purple. Not much that I'm gonna be adjusting with. So that is our basic adjustments done, our HSL done now. So like I said before, masking is a huge part of my work in my editing, and I feel like it actually helps you take it to the next level to create that kind of a feel of the image and really bring that image and the scene to life that you shot in the field. So saying that, we can just slide through here. I'm not going to be adjusting everything else. You can mess around with the sharpening and do it different ways. I tend to leave it just as is and not adjust it too much. And sometimes I'll use this panel of lens corrections, but in this image, it's not affecting apparently how I want to see anything. So we're just gonna go straight onto our masking section of the video. Now that we're in our masking section here on Lightroom, the way that I like to approach masking is using masking to accentuate or take away from the lighting. So in this scene, the lighting is coming from the right of the animal. You can see that light laying onto this bird here on the right side, and then we got our shadows. You can even see it apparently split on the facial disc of the great gray owl. And then we have shadows here, which is gonna be our shadow side, as well as likely bringing in some darkness and depth to that foreground, which isn't much of a foreground, but the bottom of the image, to bring more focus onto that animal's face and to the body of that animal. So usually I start with a simple gradient coming from the bottom of the image. I like to make them really long and accentuated, so that's a smooth transition. I'm gonna adjust it as needed. And right away, I just generally start with bringing the saturation. Right away, I just generally start with bringing the exposure down. Sometimes I'll bring the contrast up usually, because in the foreground, when there's foreground elements, they're usually more contrasty, but so it's just a habit, but you can see there, that kind of creates more separation from the fence in the background and brings more focus upwards to our animal. You can see here, if I went all the way, which actually looks still quite good, that is creating a nice push up towards the face. You can see here, that this one over here doesn't have that, and it's drawn to more of the full part of this image, but right here you're immediately focusing upwards. And what I'm hitting there is just the Y key. It helps really quickly see the before and after, so that's one I use all the time. And another trick that I will say here is I like to use the negative texture, like maybe -10, and negative clarity about -10 to 5 to 10, as well as negative sharpness, about -10 or so on this bottom filter. As long as it's not affecting the main body of the animal, it's gonna drive us up to the focus of that thing, and you can use it in any direction, but we're taking away some of the, I guess, contrast and sharpness in that foreground there and bringing it up to actually a focus of the image. I feel like it really helps us create a smooth, cohesive look with taking away some of that contrast and some of that texture in the foreground. Next, I'm going to bring in my next linear filter, which is another one, a long linear filter, really long and filtered out. The gradient is long, and I am going to bring that in from the opposite of where the light's coming from. So say now we're on the light side here on the right on the screen, and on the left we have the shadow side. So right now I'm working on bringing that contrast. Right now I'm working on bringing that exposure down and accentuating those shadows behind the animal. And you can see how this starts to affect the image, creating a little bit more drama in general here. And even just by doing that, you can see that it starts to create a bit more of a sense of the light in the scene, as well as bringing back that natural feel of the light. And you could even make it really moody. Today, I'm gonna keep this kind of in the middle, and then we can go ahead and go to that mask from the left and go subtract there. And then we can hit subtract, select subject. We're just gonna see if it pops it out nice and easy. Sometimes you have to paint in a little bit. My computer's slow, I'm about to upgrade, but there we go. So what I often like to do is work on the subject separate from the background, because that way I can create more intense kind of effect. So right now I just subtracted, it's not gonna be affecting the animal anymore. And I can even take that a little bit further just to see how it pops out. But when I'm editing, I like to have a cohesive feel, and I wanna make sure that everything kind of feels natural. So if I brought that saturation or that exposure down too much in the background, that animal would be popping out way too much. So something that I do notice here, which I'm just gonna show the overlay of the subject here. Let's just see what it's removing. So it's doing a good job here. It's only removing the owl, it's not removing the post, which I like. So I'm just gonna click away with that. And then the next one I'm going to do is come in from the light side, which is probably the most important and where we can make the most change or impact. So what I just did there was create a big old radial filter, and I have the feather set to 100. Now, the way that I like to think of the radial filter is as my sun, like an orb of light coming from the light source. The key here is that you need to use this technique as if it were coming from the light source. So that's very important. So now that we have got our radial filter in here, I've got it taken all the way over to the light source side. I've got it feathered out to 100. I've added quite a lot of exposure here because since it's so feathered out, you can just see that it starts barely affecting that on the edge of the image. But you can see that I've dragged it into that right side, and it's created quite a nice split between the left and the right side. I'll drag this out of the way so you can see. You can see there's a lot more depth that's apparent already right now. So hitting Y again and going back to that. And the next thing that I'm going to do is again, subtract this from my subject, just so that it's affecting the background only. We're gonna affect the animal on its own, remember? So now, to enhance that light source, I like to use negative dehaze. This seems kind of odd, I know, but dehaze makes it really more contrasty and colorful or saturated, but dehaze, negative use, is kind of making it a nice, soft, dreamlike effect. Since there's a little bit of grain and stuff, I can use the texture there, but we're gonna use a overall adjustment of the background here in a second. Because we brought the general exposure up with the exposure slider here, we can bring that a tiny bit more down, but I also like to bring the shadows down because using the negative dehaze does affect all parts of that image there. So just to keep it natural and neutral, I want to match those shadows side to side. And you can see right now, we've got a nice dreamy glow from the right side and still with a very natural looking image. And that's the goal that I want to do. I want to enhance the natural aspects of the image, not make it something that it isn't. And that's always what I'm trying to do when I'm kind of using wildlife images. Next, we're going to hit select subject. On this image, because that owl is so apparently easy to see, we can easily hit select. You can see down here that it has a bit of the barbed wire fence. I'm just going to hit subtract and brush that out. So subtract just allows you to take away from a mask selection that they're doing there. And this one did a really good job, so there's not a lot we have to take away. I'm just going to do it here. You can see those massive claws by my cursor there, and that's perfect. So what I often like to do is I just have a system. I go down through the basic adjustments on this mask. I bring up the contrast just to about 10. Bring up the highlights a little bit, about 10. I bring up the shadows about 10. And I bring up the whites a little bit. I might actually bring the shadows just a tad more in this image, so around 20. And it's fine for me that I do this on every single subject of my image just to make it pop out from the rest of the image. And it's very subtle, it's not crazy, but that little thing does a lot. So next I'm gonna bring up my clarity on my image here. As you can see, that affects, because this is fairly contrasty, but that clarity just makes it pop nice and easy. And now we're gonna go back to our basic adjustment panel and just have an overview because we're getting pretty far with this image and I like how the direction is going. So I might make some micro adjustments at this point. I think I am gonna bring the blacks up a little bit more and I'm gonna bring more contrast into the image. Bring down the shadows just a little bit here and bring those blacks up even more and make it a little bit more flat like that. The image, the owl itself is quite contrasty, so we wanna make sure that it's not too crazy. But now that we've got a nice starting place, we've done our masking, we're gonna go back to our masking and just make some fine-tuned adjustments and as well as some finishing touches on those masks. So I feel like we've got a beautiful flat image here, but let's take it to the next level. I do this in kind of 2 stages with my masking and really to take it up a notch and to kind of enhance that feeling of the image. I know we brought in some darkness from before to get it to like a nice beginning place, but I feel like it needs a little bit more depth because it was quite a dark image. I'm gonna bring that there, but I'm also gonna use one more linear filter just to enhance that overall darkness of this side. And then now is onto the fine details of the bird itself. So I'm gonna use this as a brush. First of all, I really want to adjust the shadows on this side of the face here. We could use a radial filter for this, but I'm going to brush that in very subtly. Just bring that up to almost match the side of the face over here. We could paint it over the entire face to see what that looks like. And it actually works pretty good. Just ever so subtly if I turn that off. Barely even can notice it, but it brightens it up a bit. In that same mask, I'm gonna bring up the whites in the face a little bit. Probably bring the shadows up even more, just to pop that out a little bit more. And so again, we're using our brushes and our mask to bring out details in the image. And I'm gonna do that once more here on the eye, specifically on the left side, just to paint that in a little bit more. Bring up the shadows. And then also my whites and highlights there because I want that eye to pop out a little bit more. And let's bring a tiny bit of that contrast back. And then as well, I'm gonna do another brush just so I match the eyes as I match the saturation as I bring it up. Just gonna tap once there, tap. I'm gonna have to zoom in, but go to 100. So you can see a little bit of grain and noise in there, but still a sharp image. This was shot, I can't see it right now, but okay. They're not super refined, but there's not much color around the eyes, so it's not gonna affect much more than just that yellow, I think. So again, we could bring it all the way up, but we don't want to make it look too crazy. So I'm going to bring that up to 25, 30. I'm also going to paint in this nice beak here as we're on it. Again, we're not changing the color here too much. We're just enhancing it a little bit to make sure that it pops out in this image. And back to fit. So now we want to see, does that match our look? I feel like it's just a little bit too powerful. I'll turn that eyes on and off and see what it looks like. Again, just that subtle boost really does make a difference. We can see what a little bit of warmth does to that too. Okay. Okay, still in the masking world here. I feel like we're doing quite well, but I do think that there's a chance that we could enhance this image a little bit more by bringing some warmth to the light side. So again, one more radial filter. Then we're just gonna toy around with what the warmth looks like coming in from the right. So this is two directions where you can take this image. That is up to personal choice. I'm gonna bring in a little bit of warmth to this side. I feel like it creates a nice contrast between the light and dark side here. As it was cooler over here a little bit more, which we could even use this and create that a little bit more of a contrast between the temperatures, which I actually do quite like here. I'm going to go back to the mask we were just on. I'm going to bring in a little bit more of the shadows in contrast. But you can see the depth in the background, nice light, and the cool kind of shadow side here. Lots of contrast between that. But I really do like the direction this image is going. So next thing is one of my last things that I like to do to create a little bit more depth without using that kind of fake bokeh effect, because we have a nice blur here, but I want to get rid of some of that kind of, I guess, choppiness or crunchiness in the background. So I'm just going to hit select background. All right, so it did a great job here. I'm just going to hit subtract objects and include this fence post in our selection here, because I don't want it to be as like unsharp or anything like that, because it's going to be part of our foreground or our subject. But I'm also going to hit subtract object and just paint around the owl just to make sure that the entire owl is included. Just to make sure it doesn't miss anything, because sometimes if the edges are softer or something like that, it looks a little bit funny, which is a bit unusual. Perfect, so now we got a really nice cutout. Next thing I'm gonna do is just try to subtract one more object, which is the fence line actually here, this barbed wire. Sometimes it has a really hard time selecting barbed wire, but we'll try and see if it does it, because we might as well keep it as part of our image. And then just gotta wait. All right, did it perfectly. It cut out our fence perfectly. So now that we got the background selected, this is really gonna help when you have an image or a camera that doesn't have a low aperture. I've recently shot on like the 600 f4, and this is shot at 7.1, I believe. And the difference between those apertures and the bokeh that you get is absolutely insane. So if you're shooting at apertures higher than 7, you're not gonna get as much separation. And this effect can help you create more separation in your images if you don't have a high aperture, without using the fake blur effect in Lightroom, which to me just never seems to like hit the point that I want. So now that we've got the background selected, I'm gonna bring the texture down about 10 to 15, makes that nice and soft and smooth in the background. I'm gonna bring the clarity down as well to about -10. Again, these adjustments, the percentages, the number doesn't matter, it just matters to how you feel about your image. And then I'm gonna bring the sharpness down about 10 to 20 as well. So you can see here now we've got a really nice focus on the animal. It's soft, but bokeh is accentuated with that effect that we just did. And we really are focused and brought our eyes to the face of the animal. So I think one more thing that we can do here is, because it's still fairly dark of an image, is just by creating a little bit of a vignette, which we're gonna do it inversely by just bringing in a little extra light here to the face. It's gonna be very subtle, but by bringing a little extra brightness to that part of the image, I'll turn that on and off just to show you the difference. So subtle, but it creates just, again, more focus into that animal. So now that to me could be a final image. I really like how this is looking. It's really clean. The image is sharp. We've got those eyes nice and popping. We've brought our focus up to the face, but the next thing is just making our final adjustments. And to me, I usually leave saturation alone kind of until the end because it's a global adjustment. But lately I've been liking a little bit more color in my images. So I tend to just hit this at the end and see how I feel about it to bring off that overall kind of feel of the image, because we want to affect everything at once. Now that we've had it to a place where it feels very even and not flat, but as a very cohesive image, saturation can just kind of adjust it either way. This is a time also where you could kind of take your blue and the cool. I remember editing this last time and I made it quite a cool image, but I like our temperature here. It's very neutral. And to me, that feels very nice and gives that animal a nice look to it. Nice lighting here on the light side. A little bit of shadows here to accentuate the depth of the face. The eyes are nice and popping. And then we've got a beautiful blurred out background from the lens and as well as our tips here. So for me, that is going to be a final image. You could affect that a little bit more from some of the techniques that we wanted by adding more contrast, etc. But that is going to be our great gray owl. So I started with this image because it is shot on my 200-600. It doesn't have a low aperture and it's not quite as sharp. The next thing that you could do to take this image even further, while this one's still pretty clean, is just by taking it into a denoise software like Topaz Denoise or the Denoise in Lightroom. I started by working on Topaz and I just kind of like how that works and I like the results really good. So what I would do is probably take that into Lightroom, or if it was more grainy, definitely take that into, Topaz. So what I would do is probably take this into Topaz after exporting it and just do a quick minimal denoise to kind of take away any of that grain or fuzz in the image, but honestly probably don't need it on this one. Our next image is going to be a little simpler. So I started with a hard one and the next one is again a flat kind of image, but it's shot on a 600 f4, a $15,000 lens or something like that that I was given to as a loaner from Sony. I got to try it out and I'm pretty much sold on buying one eventually. I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford that, break the bank on that, but hopefully I can one day do it because you can just see the separation and the sharpness. Look at this guy here, and you've seen some video of him from this lens at the intro, but just incredibly clean, even with the, what is our ISO, 1250, so not too bad. But quick start here, I'm just gonna rip through this one as we just had another animal before this where you've seen a lot of the techniques, but follow along if you can. I won't explain every single step, but you'll be able to see it and I'll talk through my experience here. So first things first, we have light kind of coming in from overhead. We still have a bit of shadow side over here because the light's on the right, but we're gonna hit our crop. I can hit auto here because we do have a line in the background, but I'm gonna use the angle and I'm just gonna suit it to it. It's actually not a flat surface there, but it actually is gonna work as one because we wanna have that straight kind of horizon. It's not meant to be a horizon, but we're gonna use it as such so it looks like a flat line. All right, so we got our crop. This is a bit of a funky one because the horns are extending past the animal and the face is over here. But because the horns are kind of the crown jewel of this image, or the antler, sorry, we wanna make sure they all fit into it, and then the face is gonna be kind of further over to the right. But let's just hit that. And honestly, a bit of a funky composition because of the way his head's tilted, but I still think it fills enough of the frame that it really makes a nice image. And you could crop this however you wanted. You could even probably make a cool landscape crop across the face here. Let's just see what that would look like. 16:9, I'm just gonna hit X to turn it the other way. And even though we'd be cropping some out there, you can see as that could be quite a cool crop if you're using it for like a banner or something like that. But we're just gonna hit edit, undo twice, and try to get back to, or 3 times maybe. One more time, 4 times. Is 4 times lucky? And hit back to our crop. And we've got a little bit skewed here still, I think. Even though it's flat, I want to go halfway in between and just expand this image as much as possible to that side. And we've got a nice crop there. So first things first, like we did last time, we're gonna look at the image, lights from above. We've decided that we're gonna probably bring in light from there and accentuate the shadow side. So I'm pretty happy with the general exposure, but we'll start with our basic adjustments now. Bring that saturation, bring that exposure up a little bit, just a touch to flatten things out. I'm gonna bring my contrast up automatically kind of to this 26, 25 area. My highlights almost all the way down. This one's pretty flat, so we don't need to do it as crazy. Bring my shadows up again. Bring some of that detail, a nice detail in his wet fur coat here. Whites, bring down a little bit more to flatten that out. Almost always going to pretty much 80 to 100% down. And then blacks, not needing much in here, but I'm gonna bring those up to about 20 and then bring that contrast up a little bit again. So this is one of those images just because those prime lenses, the 600 is incredible. It looks pretty great already, but masking is just gonna make it that much better. So now onto our, skip. But masking is gonna make it that much better. So next is our HSL sliders. And while we're on the topic, you could use tone curves if you like. I use them sometimes when I need to use highlights or bring down the highlights more, etc. But I don't use them in my day-to-day workflow. That's just how I do things. And if you want to add that in there, that is totally okay. Starting on our hue, got lots of greens and oranges in here, but we don't have much blues or kind of red hues. So we're gonna leave the reds alone. Maybe even just drag that slightly to the orange side. Nothing really intense. Our orange is gonna leave alone. Yellows we're gonna drag to the orange side again, but remember, what if I went all the way? We're gonna be affecting things that we don't want to be. So I'm gonna bring my yellows to about -10, as long as we're not affecting the animal. Greens, we're gonna bring down a little bit more to the yellow side, to the -10. Aqua, make a little bit more deeper blue to kind of hit in the middle between the blues that we're adjusting here. And then -12, 11, like I always do on my blues, and bring those purples all the way to the blue side. This is personal preference on colors that I like, so you guys can adjust that as you like. Colors are very subjective, so don't follow me exactly on that if you don't like them. Now onto our saturation. Again, not much red in here. Let's see what orange gets affected. That really affects our animal, and I like how it neutrally looks in this image. Yellows, we can see, is gonna really affect the greens in here. So I might even just bring that up about +10. Greens, because there's nice vibrant greens from that blue, or from a really gray day, I'm gonna bring those up just a touch as well. You can see what desaturated it looks like. I think I like the desaturated more. So -10. Aqua, not a lot going on here, but I always just like to play around and see what it's affecting, not much. Quick tip too is if you double tap on the color on the slider there, it'll actually just go back to neutral. So it helps quite a bit. And then if we bring the blues up here, we'll just see what that affects. Pretty much nothing in this image, so nothing apparent anyways. And could bring those purples all the way down. I usually bring the purples down because sometimes they affect the way in general hue and color of the image. Luminance, not a lot to really worry about here, I think. I think that everything looks quite neutral. Yellows we don't want to mess with because that's too much, but I am going to bring the luminance of the greens down to about -25. Aqua, skip, and same with the blues. Not much happening there. All right, now back to our basic adjustment panel after we did our HSL to adjust our temperature of the image as well as our tint. I'm gonna make this image a slight bit cooler because we could take this to the warmer side and it looks nice, but because it was a gray day, I want this to be on the cool side and make it a touch more green, not crazy, maybe around 11. And we can see already we've got just more vibrance and depth in our image. Obviously depth because of the lens, but also depth of contrast and color, bringing up the saturation of everything a little bit more. Here today, I'm probably not going to bring a lot of vibrance into this, maybe around +20 for now. And I actually am going to bring the overall saturation, I think, down just by -5. They affect things differently, and what I recommend is Googling what vibrance does and what saturation does differently. I kind of know by feel now, but generally they kind of have a different effect on things. So now that we've done all of our basic settings in our HSL and our cropping, masking. Just also should mention, this is a beautiful elk in Jasper National Park. I went up there after the wildfire and some of these guys were still thriving. I don't think many of the elk would have gotten hurt too badly or affected by the wildfire while they were probably moved. They're still thriving out there, so it was great to see. So again, first things first, negative exposure grid from the bottom, our linear filter. Added our negative exposure. I'm gonna go bring down the texture, bring down the clarity, and bring down the saturation, and bring down the sharpness. Like we could really go hard on that and bring that down quite a bit to create more depth there, and that's really what we want. I'm gonna shallow this out a little bit, so I'm gonna bring up the filter, but I'm gonna make the depth of it a little bit less, even more. Again, you guys, this is all playing around. This is my preference, and this is how I take my images up to kind of that next level, in my opinion, but it's not for everybody, right? So now, like I said, foregrounds have lots more contrast generally in them, so I'm gonna bring that exposure even further down and create lots of depth there, and that's what we're going for with this image because there is a nice foreground. We're almost eye level with this animal, if not eye level. Next is our second one, which is opposing to the light, another linear filter. Slide that in there, and we like that filter pretty much on 100% filterness, whatever they call that. I like the feather. This is what it is. I like the feather up to 100% just so it's a very smooth gradient. There we go. This is really starting to bring in a lot more drama to this image already. You can see right now it's connecting this darkness and the contrast from the bottom corner up into these shadows up here. And for me, I like a really cohesive feel to my images, so that's an important one to me. I'm gonna move on to the next one, which in this image, I think is just gonna be straight to the subject because there's not a lot else going on. Hit select subject, wait for it, have a drink of soda water. Perfect, just about a perfect selection here. I am going to go and remove a little bit of this. As you can see right here, as I've zoomed in, it has picked up a little bit on the background there. I'm gonna see if I can do it through objects because that's often a little bit faster than painting it in. So I'm subtracting object. We'll see if it can pick up that area of the background. There we go, perfect. One of my hacks, I would say, is by using select object more than anything else, because selecting with that, you would have to paint those lines and it's almost impossible to kind of paint that in by hand. So we'll see it, oh, perfect again. Okay, so I believe that was all that we had to remove from the selection because it did a really good job. So again, my quick thing is contrast 10, highlights 10, shadows 10 to 15 in that range, 20, whatever feels right. Whites up just a bit. You can see how that makes that pop a little bit more. And then this one, on this image, we're gonna use the saturation on the animal itself to make him, pop out of the image. So we can see right there, that brings out a nice kind of even, like popping that up a little bit. This image specifically, because it's quite contrasty in the animal, I'm gonna bring more contrast to that actual subject. And while we're on the subject in this image, because we have the ability to do it, we're going to bring up the clarity to about 12, and we're gonna bring up the sharpness to about +10 on the animal itself. Okay, now that we've done that, we're moving on to our last step of this image is our detailed and lighting filters. So I've grabbed another radial. We're gonna bring that in from the right, and we're going to subtract our subject before we even take the next step here. Perfect deselection. And then we're gonna bring down our dehaze to negative. Let's see how that goes. Probably go -100 on this one because we're gonna bring in a lot of pop of light. And oftentimes I will use the negative dehaze before I bring in the, you can see how this affects the image here. So if I bring it from the top, you could have that effect. But if I bring it here from the side, it's creating more of that depth of where that light seems to come from. And then back up, bring that exposure up just a bit. Bring down our shadows to make sure that doesn't seem too crazy. And then on this image, because it's a little warmer over here, I'm gonna bring in a little pop of warmth on that side, which really feel like creates a lot more color depth in the background. Move this out of your way for you guys. And it's looking pretty stunning to me. Okay, and the last thing here is just by, actually two more things. Actually, last thing, we're not gonna do the step of blurring out that background a little bit on this image. And then the last thing is just using a really nice gradient radial filter and bringing a little bit more light into the center of our image here. Just by a little bit of a tad. We're gonna do one more detailed radial here on the face to kind of bring more color and contrast into that. Oops. Sorry, sometimes when you're clicking and you select a mask while you're trying to make a mask, it messes with it. But really small one here, just on our subject's face. So I'm gonna bring the contrast up first off to create more depth there. And then I'm gonna bring the saturation up a bit. And I am also going to bring up our sharpness and clarity here, just to even focus more in on that face. See what it does as we go all the way up. It makes it a bit crazy, but just smoothing it out and a little bit of sharpness. And then like we did in the last image, we just went back to our saturation to see if we wanted to bring that up a little bit more. And to me, honestly, I would honestly choose this as to be too vibrant in a lot of cases, but because these greens are so rich, I feel like it really does it justice. And then just our final last basic adjustments here, flatten that out. I find the antlers had quite a bit of like really bright really brightness to them, almost like they're over exposed. So I did bring down the highlights and whites, but that is going to be our final image. I hope you guys can understand the way that I've explained walking through this. This is my process, and I work with a lot of different people. One of my best photographer friends, Victor, does same results, similar results, but they always come out a little bit different. This is the way that I find works the best for me. Some people use their tone curve or different ways to adjust it, and for me, this is the best. Hopefully you're able to follow along with those techniques there. That is 2 quick instances of 2 different animals on how I would edit those images to kind of come out with a better result. You can see the difference from the images that I showed you, the before and after right here, as well as kind of the walkthrough of every single step along the way. You can create presets from these settings if you really want to, and I have presets that I use, but oftentimes with wildlife, I'm finding that I'm starting from scratch, and this is gonna help you build the skills to adjust and take this skill set to other images of your own. So if you followed along or if you want to follow in the future, make sure you save this video or subscribe to the channel so that you can come back and find it easily. And also make sure that you downloaded those images just so that you can use this video to kind of check back on and follow along if you need to. Sometimes I'll leave something like this up if I'm working on a certain technique from YouTube and check back to it as well as follow along with them in the first place. And it really helps me kind of take those skill sets from theory into practice. Anyways, thank you so much. My name is Dusty, and I appreciate you guys following along with this video. If there's any certain techniques that you need more clarity on, you can message me on Instagram or down in the comments, and I can try to make some videos as well as respond to your questions in the DMs or in the comments.